Thank you so much, Dr. Weems. Let me take this moment and tell our participants we're not done yet, so don't leave. We have a webinar discussion coming up. Let me quickly introduce myself. I'm visiting assistant professor of Hebrew Bible and Christian ethics at MTS. And while we're waiting for our Demon students to maybe turn their cameras on and get themselves ready, let me just say a few words. First, I know that if you could hear a round of applause, it would be booming right now from all of us in our virtual spaces. Thank you so much for your enriching conversation and taking us down your journey. I know it was deeply powerful for me, especially the message of learning to unlearn to read, and especially in the face of those who have often used biblical texts to silence Black women's voices, that it was those texts themselves that, as you said, were the key to undoing our indoctrination. I mean, the importance of reading. So thank you so much for that. What's going to happen now is that our DMin students are going to be conversing with Dr. Weems. For those of you that are in the participant section that are not on screen, we do invite you, if you have questions, to type those in the question and answer box section. If we're able to get to those, we certainly will. I know we have a lot of attendees, so we'll do our best. But maybe, Dr. Weems, the best thing would be to turn this over to you, since you know these students and you can call them by name, although it is good to see you all again. I know I worked with you a little bit last week, so it's exciting to be here a little bit. So I'm going to mute myself now, and maybe it's, when this conversation is winding down, I'll jump back on and bring us to a close at the end.
Thank you. It is delightful to see each one of you again here just a week later. We had a wonderful time last week, and so I'm going to let you all. You are you're very good about making things happen for yourself. So I will call on one person, but after that, I'm going to let you all kind of make your own decisions about how you want to do this. So I guess this is a Q&A. You all want to interact. We had great conversation last week, but this may be an opportunity for us to kind of demonstrate to others who are looking on the kind of generative conversations that we had last week, the kind of questions, or some things you may just want to flesh out a little bit more, or what some of you took away from last week. So I'm going to call one name, but that will be it. And the rest of you jump in wherever. So Melody, you're in the middle of my screen. So you're going to have to we're going to let you, Melody Pannell, go ahead and start it for us.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Greetings to the inaugural cohort and to everyone as well. And of course, our esteemed Reverend Dr. Renita Weems. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Well, one thing that we talked about a lot in our time last week, and of course, in your presentation this evening, is about the unmasking, debunking, and disentangling as we look at interpreting the biblical text. And so as Black women maneuvering through the patriarchal society and dealing with the intersectionalities of racism and sexism, just that process, I think, of unlearning, learning, unlearning, and relearning, I think is just a journey. And so I guess my question is, what stages did you recognize yourself being on in the journey? Because I think that even in our class, I speak for myself, but I wondered, am I going from, how far am I moving in this journey? How much unlearning do I still need to do in recognizing that, even through the colonization and of our Christian experience, of our church experience, for those of us who grew up in those type of spaces. And so the journey and any mileposts is the question that I would ask as you go through this unlearning process and becoming who you are at this point.
Yes, thank you, Melody. Because I think we kind of, let me see, Yes, I think Letitia, are you on? Yes, yes. I have to. I have. We all have to point. Let's all of us point at Letitia because that is certainly part of the question. I think that she was also helpful in very helpful ways. I mean, I'm teasing, but very helpful ways of saying just how far do you go and what does this mean and how do we go about doing this? And I think that first, notice one of the things that I said in today's lecture is that we have already been doing this. We have already been bringing a critical eye to the Bible. The very fact that those of us who were there last week and a number of those of you who are online right now can certainly react there in the chat box, that many of us, we are clergy women. So there's a degree of unlearning that we have already been engaged in. Part of what I think, what those of us who are reading the Bible now with a kind of cultural lens is to be able to say, I think it's something that one of the scholars that I mentioned earlier said that first we have to ask ourselves, what do Black women see in the Bible? And secondly, what do we see and what do we do about what we see in the Bible? So it's both what do we see in the Bible, but what do we do with what we have seen in the Bible? And my point here is to say that this is not womanist biblical criticism, liberation's criticism. Black women and feminists, even feminist criticism, are not coming to the Bible to say, oh, we're about to do something brand new and we've never done it before and nobody else is doing it. And so now you church women, now this is what, no, my point here is that there have been Black women who have read against the grain, who have asked tough and difficult questions, who have challenged the whole notion of, even if they didn't know that it was challenging it, but who challenged the notion of the authority of the Bible. Because as I said to you last week, this is not just a question of, do not let language of the authority of the Bible. What they really mean is the authority of this one interpretation of the Bible. So it's not so much that the Bible is authoritative, it's really what those who use it against others to silence them is really saying it's the authority of this interpretation, because the Bible sits there waiting for readers to interpret. And readers disagree. And whose interpretation becomes the dominant interpretation, as I said to you before, is about power. It is not about literal, because even those who translate the Bible literally disagree on its literal interpretation. And so it is empowering, and is empowering readers who have otherwise been on the outside, whether they are queer or whether they are Black, whether they are male or whether they're female, whether they're able or disabled, whatever the language is. It is empowering readers to be able to say, why can't my voice be heard? Why can't this interpretation be legitimate? Who says? And these women who I encountered in those Bible studies were women who were maybe gingerly, maybe nervously, maybe a little frightened to say, what do you think? Maybe that is because, and you're like, yes, this notion that we are women in ministry, we are women leaders in our churches because we have questioned Paul. We have taken issue with Genesis, the second creation story. We have disagreed with slaves obey your masters. So I guess what I'm saying is that first, let's see it as it is not something that you have to go to seminary to ask critical questions, but what seminary hopefully does in graduate school, and being a part of very healthy Bible study and Sunday school, because you don't have to go to seminary or divinity school, being a part of very healthy and just very exciting study sessions. It means to be able to ask questions, to think a thought all the way through. And that is a process of having to unlearn being scared. What's going to happen? How far can we go? and to be able to ultimately be able to say, no, I disagree with this. I don't think that this is not, I need another community of readers so that I might read differently. That's what we are saying. Someone else.
Thank you.
Yes.
I'm gonna, Dr. Weems, thank you again for tonight, and just picking up where we left off last week, essentially.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I don't know the folks who are gathering with us today. I'm pretty sure some seminarians, some PhDs, and all that in here. But just kind of going off just what you ended with, being okay with saying that's not right, or having that courage. And so for many of us here on the panel, we've already started that journey, and we've been uncomfortable with this and still are uncomfortable, because there's always room to continue to unmask and unlearn those things. And as you were in that process, because it is a process, can you speak to us about their courage? Because we know the books you've written, and that courage to just do it boldly, to as someone said in the chat, to not be scared, essentially. So could you give wisdom and some tips per se about just going with it, and especially being a preacher, for a lot of us that are in the pulpit and get opportunities to go as an itinerant preacher and such, how to be able to be courageous and prophetic, what you say in those moments.
Yeah, and you all know from last week, I'm always looking for analogies, right? I'm always looking for, I may not be able to find an analogy right now, but I would say first, asking myself, what is it about the Bible that makes me afraid to ask these kinds of questions? Is it the Bible, or is it the audience? Is it the Bible that I'm afraid of, or is it the people who are listening to my interpretation that I'm really afraid of? And I think that maybe it begins with that question. Who are you? Let's be clear. Since you probably won't get struck down, since we're past that age where we believe that we were going to be struck down.
That's good.
Okay, since we're past that age, and we've kind of done a whole lot of things in our adult life that God in God's grace did not strike us down, since we probably don't believe that that's going to happen, is it that we really are afraid of our judicatories, our presbyteries, our denominations, our local churches, our male colleagues, some of our women colleagues? So let's put the fear in the right box, which ones we are afraid of. And I think that too is a process, but I think the shortest answer I can give you, because you all know I can give long answers. So the shortest answer I can give you is that you have to be surrounded. It helps to be surrounded by a community of readers like yourself. When you are alone, it's frightening when you're alone. But I can stand before an audience if I know I got my crew over here to the side. If I know that there is a group of other readers who I go to the Proctor conference, so because I'm really not alone. Or you go to AARSBO and you say, I'm really not alone. Or now you have access to Zoom to zoom in on anybody's Bible study now on Wednesday night. And you're like, wow, I'm really not as alone as I think that I am. So it helps to find like-minded. It helps to have role models for you, free interpreters, free Black women readers, free Black men readers. It helps. I was very fortunate. Let me just say this. I was very fortunate to have for me role models of even Black male preachers, white women preachers at a certain point in my life, who were bold and different and asking new questions. So it helps to have a role model. And your generation you've got lots of role models. And so why are you still afraid? you're not inventing yourself in a way that previous generations had to invent themselves, had to create these interpretations and then try to speak and teach and write about these interpretations out of nothingness. You have role models, and you learn eventually how to deal with conflict and difference of opinion. And as I said to you last week, people will let you push them in a number of directions if they know that you love them.
Thank you.
So, thank you.
I just want you to talk just a little bit in regards to the unmasking and debunking from the perspective of not just the female text. So when many hear of womanist preachers, they think, oh, we are talking about are the women in the text. Yeah. And so some of the things that you have challenged us with is being able to see the system. And so can you add just a little bit to that?
Yeah, great question. That the task of reading the Bible and reading it in ways that empower people, empower audiences, to begin to see that texts occur within context. Even our reading occurs within context. So to, as we shared last week, to be able to look at Psalm 137, by the rivers of Babylon, there I sat down and wept, and to begin to kind of understand that this is a lamentation, this is a lament, and that the writer is lamenting the loss of land, the loss of homeland, the loss of community and faith traditions, and to begin to see the power in that, to be carted off, enslaved into exile, and to begin to say, this is not just about gender, because Black women are more than women. We are also Black, and we are also, many of us find ourselves in terms of our class and being in situations where we are, those of us who are first generation college students, those of us who come from working class, poor background and identify with that. But also, what does it mean to be relocated and dislocated? It is bringing all those lenses together. It is what going to your First Baptist church of your city and their Bible study downtown, and the questions that they are likely not to ask. They're not likely not to ask about dislocation and relocation. They're probably not likely to ask about what does it mean to be enslaved and taken from Jerusalem to Babylon. What does it mean to be an enslaved person, to be carted off from your homeland? What does it mean? What does it mean to be, for Jesus to be crucified, murdered, assassinated by the state? What does those are the kinds of things. How would these texts be read down at the downtown church? They would not be asking necessarily these kind of questions. So if I just put it to you in your lap where you just really get it, all of you, is what ways are you reading it that is not like the downtown church? And then that's not to put the people down, but that downtown church has a certain investment in reading it in a particular kind of way. And if all we are doing is coming into ministry and we sound like them, we interpret like them, we think like that, then what does it profit us to be in ministry if we are only repeating what the downtown church is saying about these texts? We ought to be asking a different set of questions and seeing a different set of power dynamics going on in the text.
So Dr. Weems, I have a question for you. Speaking of texts and being accessible to those who we're in ministry, and we want to take back to our churches ways in which to interpret the Bible differently. Are there any readings or suggestions besides your wonderful works, of course, that you would offer to the group that is listening that would help them take back these stories and these interpretations, or how to interpret, to our churches and the people in our churches?
Yeah, so what are some more contemporary books? Are you asking modern books that are a scholarship that's been written? Is that the question?
Modern scholarship, but also historical scholarship to say how we got here.
Yeah, well, I mean, there are all kinds of commentaries if you want to just begin with, and thank you for the question, because you don't have to, this is for the informed reader. We have a term called the informed reader. That is the reader who reads. That is the reader, how to read the Bible. I think one of the books that I mentioned tonight was How to Read the Bible Like a Seminary Professor, or How to Read the Bible in a way that your pastor is supposed to be reading the Bible as though he or she went to seminary, which means that there are commentaries. I think that Gaffney's lectionary on the woman's lectionary is a great way. It's one of a great, because I know I can trust that Will is going to give you some, very good historical and literary kinds of understandings of the text. There are all kinds of commentaries. When you look at things like Stony the Road, the collection of essays by Black scholars, there's now a classic text. When you look at the New Interpreters and commentary, any really, but I'm not talking about the Moody Bible interpretation, and I'm not talking about Matthew Henry. So I'm not talking about those. So I am talking about some of the more credible ones that's where you get that kind of, what did we say last week? The interpretation behind the text of historically what was going on, possibly. Yeah, you go to a good commentary, not just to the internet and hit Jeremiah, because the right-wing MAGA white supremacist Southern Baptist group, they got that on lockdown. But if you want to really ask and read some of the great work, there are biblical scholars who are doing some great work on the historical background to these texts. Those are the kinds of things that I would urge people to read. And for the history behind the text. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Weems, could you
yes, Catherine,
share with us your approach to reading the text, how you can read the Bible differently, how you take the Bible seriously, but not always read literally, so that as we approach the text as believers or as lay women and lay men, as clergy, could you speak to us a little bit about your process of how you approach the biblical text?
now, we talked last week about, Dr. Weems doesn't have the 4 steps to reading, nor the 6 steps to read. I don't do formulas.
Yes.
There was a question that was asked of 2 of us last week, and forgive me for those of you who are listening on and who were not a part of our conversation last week. We are kind of continuing in that, and so we're not trying to be mean girls and talk about the insiders versus you all are the outsiders. So please don't think that, but that just becomes it provides me a kind of a launching pad. Someone asked Dr. Stewart last week, tell me about your preaching process. And she says, does she begin with a text or does she begin with an issue? You remember? And we both agreed we probably don't begin with text. Oh, I really want to preach this text so much, as I really want to talk about this issue. I really want to talk about this topic. And then we go to text. Now, some people are just the opposite of that. So I began with usually what is burning on my heart. And I'm able to I know enough scripture and text to be able to kind of find something where it comes close to, it cannot possibly model what is going on today. That, I think, is the important part that we are trying to establish also as informed readers, is that the Bible was not written for this period. It's not a rule book for everything. The people never imagined the world in which we live, but we share with them, Catherine, fear, intimidation, subjugation, terror, loss, lamentation. We do not share the same world. in terms of cultural context, and we do not want to live in that world. And they probably would not want to live in our world, but we do share with them. And I think that for me, Catherine, if I may kind of say this now, is where I began with the story. I began with the emotive element of the story. I began with what's the pathos? What are they afraid of? What's the power dynamic here? Who's arguing, and whose voice is the dominant voice, but whose voice is not being heard here? Who are they arguing against in this story? Whether it's a psalm, or whether it's a gospel text, or whether it is a narrative, whose voice, what is the polemic in this text? And what do I know about polemics and when people use text stories to quiet others? I think that those, but again, let me just kind of quickly wrap this up, Catherine, by saying, again, I was very fortunate, and I know everybody isn't, but then you got so many models now. So you can't keep saying, I never saw this before. You have it at the click of Zoom now. I did have the good fortune to have spent my teenage years watching a Black Kojic pastor do wonderful things to the Bible. He was as sexist and probably misogynistic as he could be. But when he told the story of David, when he told the story of Jesus feeding the 5,000, I sat up under, and I admired the Gardner Taylors, the Reverend Dr. Gardner Taylor, who, I don't know what he did ordain women clergy, but to hear him talk about it, and John, was on the Isle of Patmos, and I saw a new heaven and a new earth. I was fortunate to have the model of great holy imagination at Jude Fentress Williams, people with holy imagination, who you are looking at the text saying, it doesn't say that. Where is he getting that? Where is she getting that? That's not in the Bible. Oh, it wasn't in the Bible, but it was in our hearts. Yeah.
Dr. Weems.
Yeah, we're all talking.
Sorry. There's one question in the chat. So Saber, I'll let you.
Go ahead.
Okay. It says here, Janetta Hatcher says, as we wrestle with unlearning and relearning, how do we know when it has happened and how it is lived out?
I don't know. Great question, Dr. Janetta Hatcher. Thank you for how do we know? Well, we will listen. One of the things I've quoted my New Testament professor saying at the end of the semester, 1 year there at Princeton Seminary, you sit down after a sermon and say, Lord, I sure hope you were pleased. I sure hope that was you, God. We all do that. We don't always know. Congregations give us some idea. Yes, I'll admit. And sometimes it is a frightening kind of, they may disagree with us in ways that feel intimidating, but we know, I don't know if we ever really know. I have never myself, this is Renita Weems about to tell a real truth. I have never preached a sermon and sat down and felt confident. And that's not just the female imposter syndrome. That is the sense of me is this is such an awesome task. It is so frightening. I could be wrong. God forgive me and have mercy on my soul. I think that kind of humility is what keeps you going on. So I'm not sure if we ever know that we know that we know. I think that we do the best that we can. We preach out of our own, according to, as the scripture says, according to our own measure of faith. Some of us a little bolder than others. Some of it comes over time as you age. You are a little bolder. Sometimes you've got to preach and never know if it landed, if it was ever really received. And you just hope your walk with God is enough to keep you going and to trust that there is something so mysterious. Now, we're talking about the preaching moment, but I think it also applies to the teaching moment, that you don't know all the time whether or not you were on the right path. Did they really get it? Is that student back there, is he asleep because he was up all night, or is he asleep because I am just so bored? Do I see her? Does she look like a deer in the headlight? Am I not making sense? We all struggle with these kinds of things, and you're not always sure. But that's why I'm going to quote the King James, which I do not allow students to do. Study to show yourself approved unto God, a workman who need not be afraid, but rightly dividing the word of truth. Oh, see how many of you all are clapping because Letitia is happy right now. Okay, so you study, you just do your best, and you just roll the dice and keep it going. That's how you're just trusting God. You're trusting your gift that is making room for you, and you are trusting that the mystery of this work, whether it's teaching or preaching or just reading, will do its good work. Worketh in you a good thing, that the God who began a good work in you is going to bring it to completion, even if you are different from everybody else, and see the world and see the Bible in ways that there is an audience for you. When I was younger, I wanted to say the whole world, Andrea, but as I got older, I'm happy for the two who go with me. I don't need the whole church anymore. I thank them for clapping. I thank them for standing. But if there were two in there who got it, it's been a good day. And that's all we can all expect, is that I tried to save the whole world when I was young. And then I got older and said, nah, I'll take this one. I'll take this one. I'll take this one.
Thank you so much. I want to make sure that we're honoring our time, but I do want to get the last one or two questions in, if you would be so gracious for us. Reverend Regina Clark, did you want to go ahead and ask your question? We can't hear you. Are you?
I think he's okay.
Maybe you could, if you want to type it in the Q&A, we could do it that way. Were there, while she's doing that, any last questions from our cohort?
Thank you, Reverend Dr. Weems, for sharing your wisdom and knowledge last week and tonight. It is definitely of value. What are your plans for the future? And I understand your writing, and what does that look like? Could you share some insight? Because you challenged us in class last week to begin to write. Yes, and so I was just curious about whether or not you'd be willing to share what your intentions for the future is.
Yeah, you all got my personal warning to each one of you, what you are not to do posthumously, and make sure that not happen posthumously.
Yes, ma'am.
What does the African proverb say? Until the lion learns to write, the history will always be told from the point of view of the hunter. So if you don't write, even in an era in which reading is on the decline and books are on the decline, until you learn to write, and writing now can be from blogging, to printing a book, to printing an ebook, whatever, until you really learn to write or learn to write your own story. So I think part of my own work right now is certainly writing some of the story of those early years in terms of womanist scholarship. It is also continuing to kind of do work with, I won't just say clergy anymore. I'm with informed readers. This is larger than clergy now. I think that this pandemic and Zooming and e-learning has kind of leveled the playing field. And we are discovering, all of you, that there are people out here who want to read the Bible outside of ecclesiastical circles and buildings and authorities, who would like to ask some questions about faith. I'd like to ask some questions about life and mystery. So I want to continue those kinds of writings. I want to talk about, although I had cut my teeth on women and women in the Bible and women's faith and Black church women, hands down. But at the same time, larger questions. I hope that I am able to do at least a couple of more books where I am really talking to, as a kind of more of a public intellectual, about the notion of faith and the spiritual journey and the mystery and the mysticism of it all. So in addition to my own kind of memoir, my own history, doing a little bit more work in womanist biblical scholarship, I also want to step back and just talk about this long journey, this long journey to faith. And I think that will continue, listening for God in some ways, talking about the journey from faith to no faith, to back to faith, to no faith again, to back to faith, and back to no faith. That for as many times as I have believed in God, I have not believed in God, only to return to believing in God. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sure, I do want to put a plug in for the womanist cohort. And for those of you who are tuning in and you are not a part of the womanist cohort, but you're saying to yourself, I am interested in gleaning wisdom from the womanist scholars that we have coming here to MTS. If you are interested in the Doctor of Ministry womanist cohort, I say it's time for you to go ahead and apply. All the inaugural group, go ahead and nod your head to all the people who are questioning whether or not they should do it. Give them a really good thumbs up. Dr. Weems has already put a plug in for us. And I am just going to echo her sentiments that this is a good time. We are in a good season. Black women are in a good space. And it is time for us to use our voices. And so for those of you who are still wondering, this is a good time to say yes to the program and go ahead and apply. Thank you.
I agree. It's a great cohort. Black women interested in womanist interpretation, womanist preaching, a space of all Black women. It doesn't have to just be all Black women, but in this case, this inaugural group is all Black women and who are 15 strong. So I do also urge you to apply. I think this is good ground to invest in.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Dr. Woodbury-Moore, for that important plug. Amen to that. Yeah. Well, I think we need to bring this time to a close, unfortunately, so that we can honor the time of our esteemed speaker and our participants. Let me just take this time once again to thank Reverend Dr. Renita Weems for sharing her enriching wisdom with us tonight. Virtual applause. This was a fascinating, eye-opening, incredibly relevant discussion. I also want to extend a special thank you for the students in our Womanist Preaching DMin program who helped us delve a bit more deeply into this topic through your insightful questions and contributions. As you can see, this is an outstanding program. So, the next cohort is coming up. If you want to apply ASAP. It starts in the summer. The email would be admissions@memphisseminary.edu for information on that. And I thank each and every one of you here for joining us in this virtual space of community and learning. And I invite you to continue to follow the many wonderful opportunities available through our lecture series at MTS. That was my dog approving as well. So let me close with this benediction. May God, the liberating God who moves our hearts and minds to read texts in transformative ways, May this liberating and empowering God go with you all and bless you in your reading. Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone. Good night, everyone.
Good night. Thank you, Dr. Weems.
Thank you. Thank
Good
you.
night. Thank you, Dr. Weems.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. So good to see y'all.
Bye,
Good
y'all.
to see you as well. God bless.